One thing I've been bemoaning for quite a while is that detective work just isn't what it used to be. It's not Sherlock Holmes anymore. I'm not even sure it ever was. But it used to be they'd have to do a proper investigation, proper police work, and actually, come to deductions and, do things like that to catch the bad guys and figure out who's guilty and things like that. Now they have shiny toys. And the thing is, the shiny toys, even when they work, they never work as well as people perceive. We've even talked about this before with DNA evidence. It's like the gold standard, and the TV shows, CSI and Law and Order and all of those have kind of trained people to think, oh yeah, DNA is absolutely perfect, and no, it isn't. No, it isn't. We've talked about this before. It's actually better at saying someone could not have committed the crime as it is at saying someone definitively did. So, and the problem with so much of this is it ends up being a prosecutor's fallacy. We've talked about that before, where you're just convicting someone by statistics. And this is the problem with circumstantial evidence. You can say, oh, well, there's a 1 in a million chance that this person matches. He couldn't possibly be that unlucky, so you got to convict him. Well, if there's a 1 in a million chance, then that means there's 330 suspects in the country, doesn't it? So why are you singling him out from the other 229? So, yeah. Doesn't make sense. But, if you do enough of it, then, yes, you can build a proper case beyond reasonable doubt by using circumstantial evidence. It's just harder. A lot harder than people think it is. And that's the problem with things like DNA, or in this case, bite mark analysis, is that they're not anywhere near as definitive as people think they are. And bite mark analysis is really, as this story says, junk science. There's not really much validity to it at all. This is something that you've seen in TV shows. I remember one. I don't even remember what it was. This was years ago. But you had like the guy's arm, and there was this bite mark on it, and they had an impression of the guy's teeth, and they put the teeth over the arm, and all of his little teeth fit neatly into the little grooves, and they said, oh, wow, that's a perfect match. That's not how it works. That is not how it works. You don't get these perfect little grooves and everything from a bite mark. You get kind of, oh, yeah, I guess it's about that shape. It's not this little perfect thing. So the problem is very little of this has been subject to actual scientific rigor and peer review. The science itself might be sound. We do know how DNA works, and we do know how to use it to do all sorts of things, including determine what your ancestry is, and that's pretty amazing. But if you were to take any given forensic analysis used to convict someone and send it to a scientific journal for publication, I doubt very seriously it'd get past peer review, because there'd be all sorts of problems with it. And especially if it's something like the bite mark analysis. And hair analysis and tire marks and all sorts of stuff. I remember back, this was like 20, 30 years ago, there was this one woman who insisted that shoe print analysis, because we all walk a little differently, and so we all wear down our shoes a little differently, and she could tell by how the shoe treads were worn down who wore the shoes. She convicted so many innocent people, and it was complete junk science. She ended up being completely discredited, and they had to go through and review all of those cases. And but they still cling to the junk science because they want the shiny thing. They want the shiny thing that they can wave in front of a jury and say, look at this. That's what it's all about. But anyone could have told you, decades ago the bite marks were junk science. But it was still considered good science by the courts and by the prosecutors, because again, they liked the shiny stuff. Not because it had any validity to it, because it didn't. Not because it had passed years of rigorous review, because it hadn't. So they go into a case. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of details, but there was a murder, and they found DNA, and apparently that's about the only scientific part of this. They wanted to pin the crime on Crystal Dawn Weimer. The DNA told them it wasn't her. Guess what? They ignored it. They said, well, we're just going to go after her anyway. So it says, investigators started talking to party guests who had been at Haith's apartment the night before. They zeroed in on Weimer, even when available evidence seemed to point elsewhere. And this is from the court decision. When officers arrived at her house, Weimer was still dressed in the clothes she had been wearing the night before. She had minor injuries to her face and foot, and officers observed what looked like mud and blood on her clothes. Weimer told officers that she, Haith, and others had attended a party the night before, and that she had given Haith a ride from that party and dropped him off at another party. She then spent the rest of the night at the housing community where her mother and sisters lived. Her cousin, sisters, and then boyfriend Michael Gibson confirmed her story, so she has alibis. Weimer and Gibson also told officers that Weimer injured her foot when they were horseplaying. Weimer said the blood on her shirt and the injury to her eye were caused by a fight with Gibson. DNA testing later confirmed that the blood on Weimer's clothes belonged to Gibson, and none of the DNA samples collected from the crime scene matched Weimer. In fact, the sample suggested a male DNA profile. Yeah, they're going after a woman when the DNA says it's a man. Crazy, crazy, crazy. So 2 years later, an ex-boyfriend, and ex-boyfriends, I guess, are just so great when it comes to sources, so full of credibility, right? Anyway, he told investigators she had shot Haith and that the blood on her clothes came from the victim. Remember, the DNA says otherwise, and she has alibis. So, yeah, everything about this witness statement should be suspect. But they had a lead, and they had to follow it, right? Because we're following leads that lead to our suspect, the person we want to pin the crime on, instead of actually looking around for who actually did it. This is how they operate. This is fairly typical of it. You know, they don't show you that on Law & Order, do they? But no, they went back over the photographs taken at the scene, finding anything they can use to tie Weimer to a crime DNA evidence had already ruled her out. The first attempt failed. They said when reviewing Haith's autopsy photos, a state investigator saw what she believed to be a bite mark on Haith's hand. So it wasn't even clearly a bite mark. It wasn't even like those little teeth grooves that I was telling you about. A Fayette County dentist analyzed the injury. The dentist first concluded that Gibson bit Haith, but after examining teeth impressions for Weimer, she reported she could not identify which set of teeth caused the mark. Okay, we can't tell you that, right? We can't tell you anything. It's inconclusive, right? So what do if you're an investigator in that situation? You shop around until you find someone who will give you the conclusion you want. A bite mark expert then reviewed Beale's statement, photos of the injury to Haith's hand, and teeth impressions from Gibson and Weimer. He concluded the bite mark matched Weimer. Now this is all they have on her. All they have is this bite mark. Everything else is pointing somewhere else. And there's also the question of where does this bite mark come from? Some evidence suggested the bite could have taken place hours or days before the murder. The prosecutor went back to the expert, in scare quotes, because it's pseudoscientific crap, and conveniently secured a version that turned Weimer back into the prime suspect. Without reviewing additional evidence, he determined the bite occurred 7 to 10 minutes before Haith's death. Yep. Again, not how they portray it on Law & Order. Not how it's shown on CSI. But they found a guy willing to play ball. They went to him and they said, hey, here's what we need you to tell us. And so he told it. That's what happens when you have junk science. That's what happens when you have good science, too, because even good science can be done badly. But when it's junk science from the word go, yeah. So they went back to their key witness. Remember that ex-boyfriend who had no credibility whatsoever? Yeah, well, he changed his story. The witness claimed a black man named Lonnie had helped Weimer with the murder. But this Lonnie had been in jail at the time the murder took place. That's kind of a pretty strong alibi right there. That kind of, yeah, you would think that would just, close the door on it. Somehow this failed to dissuade the state from relying on this very sketchy testimony, adding this questionable testimony to other questionable testimony from a jailhouse informant, one who claimed the state's favorite witness was involved in the murder. Prosecutors went after Weimer, and the case fell apart immediately. Weimer's ex-boyfriend recanted his story on the stand, claiming a police officer kind of like coaxed me along when preparing his statement. The statement remained immune from dissuasion and took another swing at Weimer after the first trial had ended in a dismissal of all charges. Apparently it was a dismissal without prejudice, which always means you can refile, if you get more evidence or whatever. So the second time around it worked. Weimer was convicted of third-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. 9 years later, and remember, we're already 2 years into this, so this is 11 years all total this poor woman has had to put up with this. Weimer finally had her charges vacated by a judge who found enough evidence to suggest she had been wrongly incarcerated and imprisoned. A whole bunch more evidence came to light, and that's where this bite mark expert performed this Perry Mason move. It says, the bite mark expert also disavowed his trial testimony, stating that his opinion that the bite mark was Weimer's was based on junk science. He said on the stand, this is junk science. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't, explain why he just immediately kept coming back with whatever the prosecutors wanted to hear. Yeah, I probably would have pushed that a little bit myself. So, but maybe that's just me. They uncovered letters from jailhouse informants showing investigators and prosecutors handing out unspecified deals in exchange for testimony against Weimer. In June 2016, the charges were dropped with prejudice, ending 11 years of wrongful imprisonment. So when it's with prejudice, you cannot refile. That's it. It's over. It's done. So, unfortunately, do I need to say it? Immunity, standing in the way. These prosecutors, these so-called experts, these investigators, they behaved horribly from the word go, and yet there's so many layers of immunity standing in the way of them being held personally accountable for destroying the life of an innocent woman. So, and the prosecutor leading this witch hunt, DA Nancy Vernon, will escape a lot of the claims. Most significantly, she'll dodge any responsibility for the use of junk science. Because, according to the court, everyone was still in the bite mark dark ages and can't be responsible for the collective ignorance of law enforcement forensic techniques. So basically, since everyone believed in the junk science, it wasn't junk science then after all, and it's not their fault. No. I mean, it was known at the time to be junk science. The fact that prosecutors were believing in it might have been belief in belief, or it might have been actually fraudulent, but I don't see how you can just dismiss it by saying, oh, well, it's not their fault. No. It is. They have a duty to this. They have a duty to take their evidence and submit it to the most rigorous review possible. Otherwise, how can they be said to have been bringing a case forward in good faith? And they had no good faith here. They had no reason to believe that this bite mark testimony was in any way valid. So, anyway, the court said, during the relevant time period from late 2002 to early 2006, the unreliability of bite mark evidence was not widely recognized such that any reasonable official in Vernon's shoes would have understood that she was violating Weimer's rights by directing officers to investigate, etc. Well, not widely recognized. What does that mean? I mean, actual scientists knew it was junk science. All she had to do was ask them. But no, she shopped around for the one who would tell her what she wanted to hear. No, she was absolutely in a position to know that. And the fact that it wasn't widely recognized that this belief in junk science was so widespread makes the problem worse, not better. So, despite allegations that the bite mark expert later referred to such evidence as junk science, such evidence was widely used in criminal proceedings during and after Weimer's trial. Yeah, that should horrify you. It should horrify you that so many cases were basing all of their prosecution on junk science. That should horrify you. But nope. They just hand wave it away. No, everyone believed it at the time, so it was okay. Thus, based on the law as it existed at the time, Vernon was not on notice that her alleged conduct of directing further investigation into the bite mark evidence would violate Weimer's rights. But we still have a prosecutor who ignored the DNA evidence that she didn't like, especially that it was a male committing the crime. All of the stuff that exonerated Weimer, like the alibis that she had, and the other things that said that it couldn't have happened, and everything that showed the ex-boyfriend was a liar. And so, let's see, we'll have to face Weimer's malicious prosecution and civil rights conspiracy claim without the shields of qualified or absolute immunity. Well, we can only hope. We can only hope that there was enough stuff other than that to do it, like ignoring the DNA evidence. But I don't see how she gets around this on the bite mark evidence. Because remember, initially she was told, hey, we can't conclude anything from this. And she shopped around for an expert, finding the one that would play ball. That even if it wasn't known to be junk science at the time, even if it wasn't junk science at all, that's still not something a prosecutor should enjoy immunity for. But this is the world we live in today, sadly. We can only make it better by spreading the word, and you can help spread the word by spreading this video, sharing it everywhere you can. And you can also help me continuing to do this by giving me a little something at donate.bogosity.tv, even if it's just a few pennies in crypto. That's always welcome. Or you can become a regular supporter at Patreon and Subscribestar. Get these videos early and ad-free. But thank you so much for listening to this. This is such an important issue, and I really hope this gets a lot more attention and a lot more support from the public so we can finally end this ridiculous immunity stuff once and for all. So again, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.